So we've talked about the nature of the world, or sorry, the nature of God. Now we're going to talk about the nature of the world. And I do encourage you to follow along with your worksheet, but also with the PowerPoint slides that are there in PDF form. As we talk a little bit about creation. So creation, the book of Psalms talks about how majestic God is. The creation just sings God's praises. And it's a beautiful psalm pointing out God's amazing ability, and then down to the point where it says, and how, God, do you even think about us? Our world, as we know, is fractured, it's broken. There are many areas, wars and climate change and pandemics. There are so many things that are transforming and changing our world. It's not in the best place, but when we look at the creation story, and we'll look at a couple of verses from the book of Genesis, it says that God created the world in the way that came, and the Spirit of God, we talked about the Spirit hovered over the waters. So it was without form and it was empty. There weren't any people there. And then when we look at just the whole creation in Genesis chapter 1, you can see there's this formula, evening and morning. It really was designed for people to be able to memorize and even to recite the creation story again and again. And you see that in some of the ways that it's framed. And God said, and there was evening and there was morning, and it was so, and it was good. There was this sense of rhythm that comes about in the creation story as God created all these different aspects. And you can read that for yourself in Genesis chapter 1. And I wonder too, if there's more going on than just this simple historical narrative. You know, what does Genesis 1 tell us about God? That he's the creator, that he's all powerful. What does it tell us about people, about humanity? We're valued, we're created in God's image. We're distinct from God, and yet we're in relationship with him. It's very, very different from other creation accounts. And as the Hebrew people looked at the world, there was this idea that they had this image, and I encourage you to look up the verses that are on the slide that you can see for yourself. But there was the important thing to note in all of this is that the world was created, it was made, and that God created out of nothing, which is very, very different from other creation accounts. It was so interesting to me when I first learned that there were other creation accounts. I assumed that the Bible's creation account was the only one. But the ancient Babylonians had their own creation account, and you can read about it in the Egyptians had their own view of how the world came to be. So in the book called the Enuma Elish, I encourage you to read. There's a bit of a narrative here of how the world came together, and there was these battle that was going on between the gods, and so they looked for someone to champion and to do something about it. And this god Marduk accept the challenge, and he gets ready and he defeats Tiamat, and he splits her corpse in half. One becomes the earth, another half becomes the sky, the heavens, and then he's proclaimed king. So what does that tell us about humanity? It tells us that humans in the Babylonian Genesis are created so that the gods don't have to work. You know, and Babylon is created as the first city. So here's a great way to kind of compare it. You can see that there was this idea, there's some similarities, like there was chaos and water and darkness. And so you do kind of think, okay, there were these stories that were being told at this particular time. And only one of them, though, points out the incredible connection that God has. And yet you can see very many similarities. But the main thing, the differences are that there was war. And yet when we read Genesis, it was creation out of God's love, out of peace, out of order. There are many gods in the Enuma Elish. There's one God. God is gracious and loving, whereas the gods are self-serving Humans are slaves versus humans are the crown of creation. So as we think about this, we realize that the world is good. And that word tov is the Hebrew word for good. God created good, and humans are created in the image of God. And when we think about the nature of the world, we're reminded that humans were created in God's nature and in God's image. As we think together about where we're at in this part of the journey, I encourage you to continue on. I'll meet you in the next video.